everyone, I'm Cassandra Coppy.
And I'm Greg Ritchie.
And we are your Oregon STEM product specialists. Now, we know that you maybe have some vendor fairs coming up. We're happy to see you there. Please stop by our booth and say hi. Or maybe your district has scheduled its own presentation. But we thought there was something really important to start.
Well, you're welcoming us into your schools and your communities, so we wanted to welcome you into ours. We're here in Portland, Oregon, on a typical kind of overcast day. It's kind of cold.
It's cold.
It's a little chilly right now. So let's go inside and we'll have a little overview of Amplify Math.
Let's check it out.
See you in a minute. All right, welcome back. Cassandra and I are so thrilled to share a bit about Amplify Math with you today. You know, as former teachers ourselves, we know that the reality is that you're not just teaching content, but you're also assessing, you're differentiating, parent-teacher conferencing, planning, providing moral support, all while working to engage with those students. And sometimes that means, you just got to stick with what works, and that makes total sense. But sometimes it can also mean challenging ourselves and our students with something different, something that does that last part extremely effectively, engage students right from the start. So Amplify Math is based on the open source IM K-12 math program authored by Illustrative Mathematics, which is regarded by many of you and many districts and math education leaders as the highest quality content available. The program is highly rated on EdReports, and the lessons do a really nice job of helping students build that conceptual understanding while still tending to fluency and application. I want to make sure that I note that we have made the choice at Amplify to not be a certified partner with IM as other publishers have done. Because if so, that would mean that we wouldn't be allowed to make enhancements and adjustments that provide a more robust, clean, and really easy to use platform and experience for you and your kids. One of those is the fact that we've partnered with Desmos on our digital lessons, and we use these little things called amps. So you'll see these as we go through the lessons. They being Desmos, have been producing easy to use technology for teachers and students for a long time. You probably know that their graphing calculator is embedded into many high-stakes assessments, and their free activities are used by thousands of teachers around the country. Their approach emphasizes socializing, collaboration, and fun, and serves as the DNA, if you will, of our digital experience. We at Amplify have put our team of user experience designers, illustrators, and consultants, and data scientists to work making our program simple and elegant and helpful for teachers and students all around the state of Oregon. I've observed that we are really definitely data obsessed, and so we've conducted research to help us figure out exactly how to deliver engaging lessons that are easy to teach and provide every student with the right level of challenge. Embedded within the lessons and activities that you're going to find are these routines and teacher moves that are going to be used over and over again. And this makes it easier for you to prep, to teach, and makes that classroom experience more predictable for students, which is critical if they are generating a lot of the ideas during class. Now, the routines that you see listed here are often intertwined with Peg Smith's 5 practices for orchestrating productive discussion in your classroom. Again, all of this is just baked into that idea of launching and monitoring, connecting. We're going to see that later in the scope of a lesson. So you don't need to worry about learning new ways to manage activities. And oftentimes we find that what you're already doing as good teachers, you're going to see embedded into this curriculum to make it just that easy. Here's like one of those routines, think, pair, share, right? So as you look at what's on this slide, you might be thinking, I kind of do this already. That's fantastic. That's what we want, because this curriculum is going to then align right with what you're already doing. Or here's one called Info Gap, where we have a goal of providing opportunities for students to engage in mathematical conversations. And you can see there are some steps about how to do it. So Amplify Math is really kind of something different, but it's in line with what we see happening around the state of Oregon already. 3 big ideas that I hope you're going to see as we walk through this. One is that the content and the tools will intrigue your students by presenting interesting and relevant real-world problems and narratives from history and from today. We're going to start with that in just a minute. Second, we're going to help you transfer the responsibility for the learning to your students so they develop a deeper understanding. And then third, back to data, it's presented to teachers and administrators to provide a clear picture of where students are at, throughout the entire course of the year. And then finally, it doesn't really matter that a math program is high quality and rigorous if it's difficult to use. So collectively speaking, we have spent thousands of hours refining our digital and print experience to make it both intuitive and easy to use, while ensuring parity between the digital and that print experience. All right, so I mentioned that narrative. Let's take a closer look at that narrative idea. Let's face it, we all love a good story. So here's some examples. In grade 6, we talk about the salt trade in Timbuktu in the 14th century. Students are introduced to the ideas of balance and fairness. And they tackle this problem: how much gold is a pound of salt worth? So we're learning about expressions and equations and variables. And then here's one from grade 7. Students are learning about how headlines can be a little bit misleading if you don't understand the math that the reporters are talking about. In this case, we're learning about percentage change. Here's an example from grade 8 where students are digging into data related to the ozone layer and skin cancer rates. That's the narrative around this, but as they do, they learn that phytoplankton and krill are important parts of the Antarctic ecosystem, and that when one of those populations is reduced by harmful UV rays, it can have real impacts on other species in the ecosystem. And eventually they return to the topic of the ozone layer and its recovery post 1990, and even consider ways that they can reduce the strain that humans put on our ecosystem. And so throughout this, they're doing all this math along the way. I love this one in Algebra 1. I have a music background myself, and in Algebra 1, we have an entire unit of math all based around the narrative of jazz. So these narratives are introduced at the top of each subunit and then touched on every few lessons. It's not a heavy-handed approach, but one that helps students see how the math that they're figuring out has played a role in our history and impacts everyday lives. All right, Cassandra, now to that idea of shifting the responsibility of learning to the kids, or more student-centered learning.
Thanks, Greg. When we speak to student-centered learning, a key component is that students see themselves in the curriculum that they use. In Amplify Math, representation matters, and it is at the foundation of our program. Helping our students develop a strong, healthy, and flexible math identity is crucial if we are to prepare the next generation of creative problem solvers. To that end, we've designed Amplify Math to show students 3 things. Number 1, they are mathematicians. Number 2, the math of today's world was largely shaped by a diverse range of mathematicians who deserve to be learned about. And number 3, learning is never finished. To build that foundation, we consulted and partnered with respected authors in the field. Our advisors include Phil Darrow. Phil's focus is on content modification and strategy. Fawn Nguyen, who focuses on problem solving. Sunil Singh, who focuses on narrative and storytelling. And Paolo Tan. Paolo's focus is on ensuring our materials help you support all students in experiencing success in math. In addition to our advisors, we have partnered with a lot of great organizations and projects. You heard Greg speak to Desmos. We also have partnered with the 5 practices at the Gates Grant work. And additionally, Dr. Erica Walker at the NSF Grant, who's focusing on interviewing Black mathematicians. So let's take a look at some of our mathematicians and how their stories are part of your math lessons. The math of today's world was shaped by a diverse range of mathematicians, and they deserve to be learned about. In Amplify Math, we've embedded these mathematicians into the program. These diverse mathematicians and their work are introduced to students within the context of the lesson. Students are always shown the connection between the featured mathematician's work and the work that they are doing in class. Learning about their lives and contributions, students see that there's no one face of math achievement. There are over 100 diverse mathematicians featured throughout the program. We'll start with a couple of historical mathematicians. In grade 6, students will learn about Liu Hui, an ancient Chinese mathematician, and the students will begin to conceptualize volume. In 7th grade, students learn about Archimedes, whom they may have heard of, but they most likely don't know that Archimedes used the perimeters of 96-sided regular polygons to calculate pi. The student work then reflects the work of Archimedes, starting with a low floor activity, building to that high ceiling, an activity that all students can engage in to build their conceptual understanding. And then in the upcoming activities, they see how a contemporary mathematician, Emma Haruka Iwao, calculated pi to 9 trillion digits. Students see that math is a constant, but it's also evolutionary. Jennifer Balakrishnan from Guam proved there are exactly 7 rational solutions to what is known as the cursed curve. Now, Balakrishnan is also a fan of Pythagorean triples, and her work inspires the students' work on this topic throughout their lesson. Lastly, in Algebra 1, students meet Jelani Nelson, a professor of electrical engineering and computer science at Berkeley. His work in fast algorithms and large data sets set an example for students as they engage in quantitative reasoning and modeling. Narrative, storytelling, and connection to diverse mathematicians are foundations in Amplify Math because we know that our content must reflect the diversity in cultures, ability levels, and gender identities of our communities. And when we do this, the result is that our students believe they are capable of being those mathematicians. We said that Amplify Math is something different, and I hope you're starting to see how and why. These foundations are all part of shifting the responsibility of learning to our students. The shift to student-centered learning may be a bit of a change in your classroom, or it may be how your classroom is already structured. In either scenario, the research shows us that when we follow this approach, student success in mathematics is much higher. In student-centered learning, we want to engage all learners right from the beginning. One way to do this is by introducing an interesting, often real-world problem at the beginning of the lesson, and then letting students come up with reasonable answers before any direct instruction takes place. This sets the scene for deeper understanding. Number one, it shows them that there are multiple ways to approach math, and having students see and share these is key to engagement. And number two, we're investing in building up the way students think, not just having them memorize a fact or a procedure. But we also know it's important for our students to have direct instruction on topics as well. You'll find in student-centered learning, it is a mix of approaches that will best serve students. Students will be given the space to construct knowledge when it makes sense, but also explicit instruction on concepts and skills where a constructivist approach wouldn't necessarily deepen their understanding. You're teaching the math at hand in the best way that is possible for lasting understanding. In Amplify Math, this is how the lessons are structured. Whether this is how you've been teaching in your classroom or you're moving towards this model, you'll be guided through this process right at the lesson level. And remember, this approach has the end goal in mind, benefiting our students. In student-centered learning, students learn that problem solving can be done independently, but also collaboratively, that all students can participate. They learn that teaching shifts from about asking questions to being interested in questions. The learning feels more relevant, and student attitudes about math change. As this shift takes place in the classroom, we also know that there are questions and a desire to support students from our communities. For every unit in Amplify Math, there is a caregiver support letter that provides the background on mathematics, vocabulary, the progression of skills that students are working on, and even example problems. We know that it takes a village, especially when creating mathematicians. We want to make sure your communities have what they need to be helpful for your students.
All right, well, hey, let's talk structure for a little bit. Every unit is going to outline how those pillars of rigor, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application will be addressed over the course of each lesson. Grades 6 through 8 are made up of 8 units each, and Algebra 1 includes 6 units. Now, we can discuss this more later, but a note that those interim assessments that you see there, those may be administered according to your district or school's timeline. This depiction here is just one of many possible administrations of that. Amplify Math units have been developed around central topics and broken into subunits addressing, like we talked earlier, those compelling historical and modern narratives that make math more accessible and more relevant. Solving problems in this subunit lesson, students develop strategies to build upon prior knowledge and then deepen their understanding of mathematical concepts and skills. Teachers have multiple opportunities to assess student understanding, including pre- and post-unit assessments, warm-ups, and what are called exit tickets. The number of subunits and lessons vary from unit to unit. Again, this depiction shows the general structure of a unit. Here's how these units are structured. You're going to see that we do include a pre-unit diagnostic and these low floor, high ceiling launch lessons. We want every student to be engaged right from the outset. And then the units are broken down into subunits, each with their own narrative thread. Where and when appropriate, a mid-unit assessment is also going to be included. To close out each unit, we include what's called a capstone lesson to help students see how everything that they've figured out comes together in an end-of-unit assessment, and then also an optional performance task assessment too. Now let's look at the lesson. So every lesson, if we break that down, begins with students diving into the math and interacting with each other during a warm-up task. Lessons include automatic, just-in-time supports that are called power-ups. I'm going to walk you through this more in just a little bit. Students dig into 3 or 5 tasks throughout this lesson and share their observations and reasoning, allowing the teacher to use the strategy of sequencing and selecting to promote more than just math talk. And this is what Cassandra was talking about earlier. The teacher helps students connect their ideas with the overall mathematical picture of the lesson, the unit, and the course. And then the lesson concludes with students completing an embedded formative exit ticket. Additionally, teachers can assign practice problems to work on outside of class, and you'll see these as you look through any particular lesson. Now, we developed a consistent method to teaching each activity through a very simple 1, 2, 3 step approach. And you're going to see this more, especially in the print. You can see this right there front and center: launch, monitor, and connect. Our field trial teachers found the guidance to be so concise and skimmable, both while prepping and then actually while teaching too. Thinking back to that idea of narrative, right? So let's wrap it all up and go back to what we were talking about earlier, promoting connections to students' everyday lives. Each unit starts with this big idea that connects to the key mathematical concepts. The subunit begins with a story that really piques that student interest, and its narratives weaves throughout and connects all those lessons together. And that narrative thread continues with the lesson activities, which provide students with really meaningful context. And then at the end of the unit, that capstone lesson pulls that narrative thread of the unit together. So now let's take a look at your big topics of study for each unit. Before I do that, here's just a quick look at what the student materials are and the teacher materials. One thing we're so proud of is how there's a blend of print and digital. So this is absolutely not a digital only experience, nor is it only a print only experience, but it embeds the best of both worlds right there. All right, so scope and sequence. Look at this content. Here we are looking at grade 6. Again, there's 8 units of study for grade 6. And then if I switch to grade 7, here are your units of study for grade 7. Again, those first 4 units over the first half of the year, and then we wrap up the second semester with these last 4 units as well. Same thing, same experience with grade 8. You can see that rigor as we go through this particular grade and the variation that is appropriate for every one of those units as we work through the content, functions and volumes, the Pythagorean theorem, and finally association in data as we wrap up grade 8. And then in Algebra 1, again, there's only 6 units of study for Algebra 1, a little bit more comprehensive. You have those 3 assessment days for each unit as we wrap up those 6 units, ending with quadratic equations.
Now let's take a look at our structure on our online dashboard. I just want to show you the ease of use and also how we can use some of our digital experience with our students. Once we've gone into our math program, you'll see that we have a drop-down menu to get to our different grade levels. I'm going to dive into Unit 7.3, and this is measuring circles. And once we go into our units, you're going to see on the left-hand side of your screen all of that kind of scope and sequence in your various materials. You can click on our drop-down arrows to open up even further resources. Again, anything that you have in print form, you're going to find online. So all of those supports that we have in place, our different references, our differentiation, all of that will be right in our left-hand menu. Now I'm going to go into one of my lessons, and you'll see that we start off with a launch lesson in every one of our units. Now, our launch lesson, again, is that real opportunity for our students to go into that low floor activity where all of our students become engaged. You'll see on my dashboard, again, I have everything that I would see in print form, our focus, coherence, rigor that Greg spoke to previously. On the right-hand side, if we need just a couple other pages, we can always print those off, and those are in PDF form. But here's the great piece about our digital experience. We'll see on the right-hand side, I can click Teach. Now, what that does when I click Teach is it launches my digital experience lesson. And you can see I have all of my different lesson parts ready to go. And I can simply start my class, and my students then are logging in on their own devices, and they are experiencing these activities. Now, this is kind of a famous problem, the GOAT problem, and it's looking at when an object moves a given distance around a point that it creates a circular shape. Now, these activities are the pieces that are powered by that Desmos component. Our students have the opportunity to then experience math in a different way, and you can see that they have all of these tools up here. Now, the other great piece for the educator is that I can go in and see all of the different things that my students are doing. We've talked about that there isn't one way to solve all the problems, right? We want to show our students that there are a variety of ways and not always one certain specific answer in the end. Sometimes that there is. I have now looked at my student work screen, and I see all of my different student pieces on this screen. I can also choose these activities to create kind of a collaborative conversation in class. Maybe I want to share how this student came to their answer. I can click Present, and we'll note that this is going to present this work anonymously. So on our teacher dashboard, that teach aspect is such a great piece to be able to use in the classroom and really move towards that student-centered learning. Again, our students have access to those activities. We're able to share those in a variety of ways and really start a new conversation around math. And speaking of conversations around math, we know that over 65% of multilingual learners in the US are Spanish speakers. Something that we're really proud of is to be able to have our math instruction in both English and in Spanish. You can see on my teacher dashboard, I simply have a toggle right on the bottom of my screen to be able to switch from English to Spanish, but I really want to show you how we can switch our student language. If I go up to my teacher settings, I can actually choose the specific students that will receive their instruction in Spanish. Now, when we were looking at our digital experience lesson, I'm going to go back to that as well. We can also switch the language of instruction on this. And this piece we can move from English to Spanish, and our students will have that opportunity to learn mathematics in their language. The last piece that I wanted to show you on our teacher dashboard is something that Greg is going to speak to in our next sections, and that's our power-ups. When we talk about differentiation, it's so important to meet our students where they are and provide those learning opportunities right in that appropriate time, right? So in the next lesson, we can see here we have those power-up settings, and this is something that we didn't see on the previous lesson. Well, that's because this is lesson 2. Now we're using the formative assessment from the previous lesson to be able to create some student groups and provide that differentiated instruction. This is going to be data-driven.
Thank you for that walkthrough that really demonstrated how smooth and easy to use this digital platform is. I love that. You know, back when we talked to you at the beginning, that third bucket or that third thing we wanted to highlight for you was all about monitoring progress along the way. One of the biggest ways that this is done within Amplify Math are what are called power-ups. Power-ups are alternative warm-ups that can be automatically assigned to students based on their performance on a formative assessment question embedded in the previous lesson's practice set. I'm going to show you this like live on screen in just a second. Power-ups are sometimes these things that stretch back 1 or 2 grades even to expose students to content that should help them make strong connections between what they know and what they'll be doing for the rest of the class. Now, if you teach online, your students are automatically grouped for you, and all you need to do to differentiate is to literally just start the lesson. I mean, how easy is that? Said another way, power-ups are kind of these things that allow you to differentiate the instruction right at the beginning of the lesson when it can make the biggest impact, ensuring that all of your students are ready to get to that line for the grade level content. So for this example here, I've got two characters, right? Petra and Peter. Let's say that Petra and Peter are both given a problem, which is exactly what happens. All of your students are presented with a problem, and they both do this individually on their own. Petra comes up with these answers right here of the answers to the equation that she's presented, and Peter comes up with something different. And once these are scored, we can see that Petra got both right, Peter missed one. And so what might happen is that when these students come to class the next day, 24 hours later, when they launch their lesson, they are already grouped in either a warm-up group or a power-up group, depending on that, depending on that content that they did from the previous day right there. And that'll, for that student that needs that power-up, will just really reinforce some of those skills that they might need so they can get back on track. This, of course, as we said earlier, meets those standards, sometimes standards from a previous grade even, as students really build that comprehension and knowledge. And then we come up to the next activity, and both students, Petra and Peter, are kind of on track there. If I show you what this looks like on the digital platform, as Cassandra already showed you, here's, kind of what sixth grade would look like. Of course, I can toggle to any other grade here, and then I can toggle and click on one particular unit. So here's unit 1, area and surface area, and there's all the different subunits, the various lessons in here. Let's go into this one right here, lesson 4, composing and rearranging to determine area. And when I click on that, this is what it looks like. And one of those little items on that left sidebar you can see is power up. And when I click on that, this is what I would see. I can see where I use the power up and also how it is informed, specifically like performance on lesson 2, practice problem 5 is one of the things. And here is where that is right there. So it shows me that right there, how it's informed there. And there's that problem activity. So when students are doing this, that data is recorded and then it launches for the next day that power-up activity if needed for students. And of course, you can move your students around. You can customize this as much as you want. You can see down below there how you can manage the groups. And again, those are automatically grouped for you, but if you as a teacher want to move students around, you have that ability. So this real-time monitoring is one of the most powerful parts of this Amplify Math platform that allows you to track student progress along the way, monitoring how every student is doing, every single one. That's what we want. And also how to present students anonymously. Maybe you've seen this already, how, if you want to project and present someone's work, you don't have to have their name exposed, but you can do that anonymously. And of course, all along the way, beginning, during class, and after class, you can check in on individual students, which of course is really what you want. You've already seen this already as you've reviewed this and seen it today. Diagnostic and formative assessments, and of course those summative assessments that we want during the unit and certainly at the end of the unit as well, that captures that data from every moment for every standard. I love this reporting here. This is so powerful. What you can see right here is this is of course a fake student, but you've got 74% towards the standard. That's the competency towards this one particular standard. And you might think, oh, okay, well, just 74%, not great. But look at the next number. That 25% indicates that only 25% of the activities and the problems and the storylines that connect to that particular standard have even been addressed. We got 75% more of them still to go. So that 74% is actually fantastic, because by the time we get to 100% on the right side, that standard's progress, no doubt that student is going to be doing just fine. So again, you can see that all along the way. That is all done automatically for you. And you can see where in the curriculum that standard is covered. And then, as we said earlier, how did my students do on each exposure, like individually, but then as a whole as well. We're so proud of our professional development, both in person that we'll provide you along the way, and you can talk to your sales rep about what that would look like for your particular school or district or classroom. But right here on the hub, we have an entire hub which is built all around professional learning with these resources to support teaching and learning that's rigorous, engaging, and meaningful. So right here, if I click into professional learning resources, this is what I get. There's 4 different blocks right there, as well as a help center up there where I can then go to this help site. You can do it right now, amplify.com/help. Type in your question, type in a keyword, and you'll get all the support that you might want there. All right. Well, hey, teachers, thank you so much for your time and attention and excitement about Amplify Math.
Greg, I think now might be the time to get a little fresh air.
Not a bad idea at all.
We know you're going to have questions as you dive into Amplify Math. You can always email your local representatives.
Or, better yet, we'll see you in your local communities to be sure you have everything you need in this adoption process.
Love
See you
that.
later.
See you later.